The silence in the solicitor's office was so thick I could hear my own heart beating against my ribs. It was 4 o'clock on a rainy Thursday afternoon in London, and I was sitting in the third row of chairs, watching my sister Victoria take the place of honor beside Mr. Thornton, the family solicitor. She wore an impeccable black Burberry suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, whilst I still wore my scrubs from St. Thomas's Hospital where I worked as a nurse. I hadn't had time to change after my 12-hour shift. My Aunt Margaret threw me that look I'd known since childhood, a mixture of pity and disdain. Beside her, my Uncle Charles checked his mobile, probably mentally calculating how much Victoria would inherit. The cousins were all there, forming a semicircle around the massive oak table where our mother's will would be read. I was the only one alone, no one to support me. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat and began the reading. The words came slowly, each syllable echoing in that overly air-conditioned room. The house in Richmond would go to Victoria, the flat in Knightsbridge as well. The family jewellery, including our grandmother's pearl necklace from Edinburgh, would be hers. The investment portfolio at Barclays, hers. The Range Rover Evoque, hers. Even the first edition collection of our father's books, who died 15 years ago, would belong to Victoria. For me, my mother had left only one sentence in the will, a single line that the solicitor read in a neutral voice, but which cut through the air like a blade. To my daughter Emma, I leave my wishes that she find her own path, as she has always insisted on doing. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I didn't let a single one fall. Not there, not in front of them. Victoria sighed theatrically, feigning embarrassment. "Oh, Emma, you know how Mummy was. She never got over you choosing to be a nurse instead of a doctor like she wanted. And then all those rows." She shook her head, as if she deeply regretted it. "But don't worry. I'll make sure you get something. Perhaps some furniture from the house, or the Wedgwood china you always liked." China. My sister was offering me china, whilst she inherited millions. I looked around the room. Everyone avoided my gaze, some whispering amongst themselves. "Poor thing," I heard my cousin Charlotte comment quietly. Always was the black sheep. Mr. Thornton was already beginning to organize the papers when I stood up. "Mr. Thornton, I need you to examine a document." My voice came out firmer than I'd hoped. I pulled from my worn handbag a plastic folder I'd been carrying with me for 3 years. The solicitor frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Miss Whitmore, the will is clear. If you wish to contest it, you'll need to find your own solicitor. This document was signed by my mother 3 years ago, notarized and witnessed. I believe it's relevant to this reading." I handed him the folder. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Always so dramatic, Emma. Except that Mummy made her choice. You spent the last 5 years rowing with her, never came to family gatherings, constantly criticized her choices. What did you expect?" Mr. Thornton took the document reluctantly. I saw the exact moment his eyes widened as he read the heading. He adjusted his spectacles, read again, then looked at me with a completely different expression. "Miss Whitmore, this document. Are you certain you want me to read this here now?" "Absolutely certain, Mr. Thornton." I crossed my arms, feeling for the first time in years that I had control over something in my life. The solicitor cleared his throat again, more nervously this time. "This is a deed of acknowledgement and confession, signed by Mrs. Elizabeth Whitmore, properly notarized and witnessed." Victoria leaned forward, her smile beginning to falter. "What nonsense is this? Mummy never mentioned any debt." Mr. Thornton continued reading, his voice growing more serious. "I, Elizabeth Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, acknowledge and confess that 23 years ago I misappropriated funds belonging to my daughter Emma Whitmore, arising from compensation for medical negligence that resulted in permanent damage to her hearing when she was 5 years old." The silence in the room was absolute. I felt all eyes turned to me, some noticing for the first time the discreet hearing aid I wore in my left ear. Victoria went pale. Mr. Thornton continued. "The original compensation amount was £800,000, which I invested in a property in Richmond under my name, promising to transfer it to Emma when she turned 18. I acknowledge that I never fulfilled this promise. and that the property has considerably increased in value, now worth approximately £4 million. My Aunt Margaret dropped her handbag. Victoria stood up abruptly. That's a lie. Mummy would never do that. Emma must have forged this document. Mr. Thornton interrupted her with a gesture. Mrs. Victoria, please sit down. This document is properly notarized and registered. Witnesses are also mentioned. He continued reading. I further acknowledge that I used the income from this investment over the years exclusively for the education and privileges of my daughter Victoria, including her year at Oxford, her medical degree at Imperial College, and the establishment of her private practice, whilst denying similar resources to Emma, who had to work from the age of 16 to support herself. I remembered those years, me working as a cashier at Tesco to pay for evening classes, whilst Victoria did a gap year in Australia. Me studying at night after exhausting shifts, while she had private tutors. Me living in a bedsit in Croydon, while she was gifted a flat upon graduation. Mr. Thornton reached the final part of the document. I direct that, regardless of the contents of any future will I may draft, this acknowledgement of debt must be honored as a priority, with the Richmond property to be transferred immediately to Emma, plus compensation for 23 years of unpaid income, to be calculated by forensic accounting. Victoria was red with rage. She manipulated you. Emma has always been manipulative, always knew how to make Mummy feel guilty. This must have been done when she was ill, not thinking clearly. I turned to her, maintaining the calm that years in A&E had taught me. Mummy was perfectly lucid 3 years ago, Victoria. It was right after we discovered you'd been embezzling money from her practice for your holidays and shopping, remember? When she found out you'd forged her signature on several checks, Victoria's face lost all color. Aunt Margaret choked. Uncle Charles finally put down his mobile. Mr. Thornton coughed discreetly. There's another detail in the document. Mrs. Elizabeth mentions she possesses evidence of financial irregularities committed by Mrs. Victoria in managing the family medical practice. This evidence is in a safety deposit box to which only Miss Emma has access. It was Victoria's turn to collapse into her chair. She knew exactly what the document was referring to. For years she'd used our mother's practice as a front for undeclared cosmetic procedures, pocketing the cash. Mummy had discovered everything, but as always, had protected her golden daughter. The difference was that this time she'd documented everything. Emma, we can talk. Victoria's voice was weak, almost unrecognizable. We're sisters. We don't need to take this to court. You don't understand. I had expenses, commitments. The practice wasn't doing well. I needed that money. I stood up, taking my bag. For 23 years, Victoria, you've had a life of luxury built with money that was rightfully mine. Money from compensation because I lost part of my hearing due to medical negligence. You knew all along, didn't you? I saw in her eyes that it was true. She'd always known. Mummy must have told her at some point, perhaps to justify why she gave everything to her and nothing to me. Mr. Thornton intervened. Miss Emma, given this document, the current will lose much of its validity. The Richmond property must be transferred to you immediately, and a forensic audit will calculate the amounts owed. This could mean that a large part of the estate is rightfully yours. I looked at the faces around me. Aunt Margaret was still in shock. The cousins were whispering frantically. Uncle Charles was already typing something on his phone, probably consulting his solicitor. But it was Victoria's face that struck me. For the first time in her life, she didn't have control. For the first time, she was on the losing side. Emma, please, she whispered. Think about what this will do to my reputation, my practice, my patients. I'll lose everything. I stopped at the door and turned one last time. You know what's ironic, Victoria? If you'd treated me like a sister, if you'd at least pretended to care about me, I would probably have shared everything with you, but you chose to humiliate me to the end. You chose to offer me China, whilst you swanned about with millions that fundamentally were built on my suffering. I left the office and went down in the mirrored lift of the Georgian building in Chancery Lane. The rain had stopped and the late afternoon sun was gilding London's rooftops. For the first time in 23 years, I could breathe. My mobile vibrated. It was a message from James, my husband, who was at home with our 3-year-old twins. How did it go? Are you all right? I smiled, typing the reply. I'm coming home, and for the first time, love, everything really is all right. I walked to my old Ford Fiesta, which Victoria had always mocked when we met. In a few weeks, I could buy a new car. But honestly, this Fiesta had taken me to all my shifts, helped me build my career, meet James, bring my babies home from hospital. It had more value than any Audi Victoria drove. 2 months later, the property transfer was complete. The forensic audit calculated that I was entitled to another £3 million in compensation for the unpaid income. Victoria tried to contest in court, but her own barristers advised her to settle when they saw the evidence in the safety deposit box. There were spreadsheets, bank statements, recordings. Our mother had meticulously documented every misappropriation, every forgery. The day I signed the final papers, Mr. Thornton handed me a sealed envelope. Your mother left this for you with instructions to deliver it only after everything was resolved. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter, handwritten in that careful script I knew so well. Emma, my dear, if you're reading this, it means you finally found the courage to use the document I gave you. I know I waited too long to do justice, and I know no amount of money can compensate for the years of unequal treatment. The truth is, I always knew you were stronger than Victoria. She needed all of that to feel special. You were special just by being who you are. Perhaps that was my greatest injustice, punishing your strength and rewarding her weakness. The medical error that caused your hearing loss was my fault. I was the responsible doctor. I who made the mistake with the antibiotic dosage. I've lived all these years trying to compensate for my guilt, but in the end, I raised one spoiled daughter and neglected another who needed only my love. Forgive me if you can. Use well what is rightfully yours, and know that even though I never showed it properly, I always loved you. You were my greatest lesson that love isn't measured in material things, but in resilience, in forgiveness, in carrying on even when everything seems against you. Your mother, Elizabeth. I cried there in the solicitor's office. I cried for the lost years, for the mother I'd never really known, for the sister who chose greed over love, but mostly, I cried with relief. I finally understood everything. My mother's coldness wasn't lack of love, it was guilt. A guilt so great she couldn't look me in the eyes without remembering the mistake she'd made. With the money, I didn't change much in my life. I continue working as a nurse, but now part-time to spend more time with my children. James opened the garage he'd always dreamed of. We bought a simple house in a quiet part of Wimbledon, with a garden where the children can play. I set up an education fund for the twins and another for charity, specifically for children with hearing impairments. Victoria lost the practice. Without the Richmond property as collateral, and with the irregularities exposed, she couldn't keep the doors open. Last I heard, she'd moved to Manchester, working in an NHS clinic, ironically, practicing the kind of medicine she'd always despised, treating ordinary people, earning a modest salary. Perhaps, just perhaps, she's learning what our mother tried to teach too late, that a person's worth doesn't lie in what they possess, but in what they are. Aunt Margaret tried to get closer after everything was settled. She appeared at my house with a Victoria sponge cake and rehearsed apologies. Emma, darling, you know I've always thought of you as a daughter. If I'd known all this, I would have supported you. I offered tea. We were polite to each other, but we both knew it was too late to pretend a closeness that had never existed. She'd spent 20 years treating me like an intruder at family dinners, whispering with Victoria about my simple clothes, my old car, my mechanic husband. The cousins also attempted a sudden rapprochement. Charlotte sent me a message saying she'd always admired me, that she'd always known I was special. William appeared with a fail-safe investment proposal, needing only a small initial investment. To all of them, I was polite but firm. The money hadn't changed who I am, but it had certainly revealed who they'd always been. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. I received a call from Victoria. She was crying, which rarely happened. Emma, I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant. I stayed silent for a few seconds, processing the information. She continued. It's David's. Remember him? We were at uni together. We've reconnected here in Manchester. He's a comprehensive school biology teacher. It's not the life I'd imagined, but I'm happy. For the first time in a long while, I'm genuinely happy. We talked for almost an hour. She told me about the simple life she was leading, how she'd learned to cook, about the patients at the NHS clinic who treated her with an affection she'd never experienced in the private practice. Emma, you know what's most ironic? Here, treating people who sometimes don't even have money for the bus, I feel more like a doctor than I ever did in that practice. Mummy would have hated it, but at the same time, I think she'd have been proud. When she had the baby, a girl she named Elizabeth, I visited her. It was strange at first. Decades of resentment don't disappear easily. But when I saw Victoria rocking her daughter in a 2-bedroom flat, furnished with IKEA furniture, wearing a Primark dress, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Peace. Emma, she said, whilst I held little Elizabeth, I want my daughter to know her aunt. I want her to grow up knowing that family is more important than money. I don't want to repeat Mummy's mistakes. I looked at that tiny creature in my arms, thinking of my own children at home. We'll try, Victoria. One day at a time, but we'll try. The Richmond house I transformed into a support center for children with hearing impairments. It was a decision I made with James one Sunday afternoon, whilst our children played in the garden. We want the money, but not its weight, he said, and I agreed. The Elizabeth Whitmore Center opened its doors a year after the will reading. At the opening, Victoria appeared with little Elizabeth in her arms. She didn't make a speech, didn't want the spotlight. She just stood there, watching the children with their colorful hearing aids running through the garden that was once ours. Mr. Thornton was also present. He sought me out in a quieter corner of the celebration. Miss Emma, in 30 years of legal practice, I've never seen such a turnaround. Your mother was a complex woman. I smiled, watching a girl of about 5, the same age I was when it all began, laughing whilst learning sign language with a volunteer. We're all complex, Mr. Thornton. The difference is that some of us learn from our mistakes while still alive. Others leave letters and documents, hoping justice will find its way after they're gone. Today, 3 years after that rainy afternoon in the solicitor's office, my life has found its balance. I continue working as a nurse, now coordinating the pediatric ward at the hospital where I work. James has expanded his garage and employs 5 mechanics. Our twins, Oliver and Sophie, are 6 years old and love visiting the center we created, playing with the children who attend. Victoria comes to London once a month with Elizabeth and David. We have lunch together, talk about mundane things, laugh at the children's antics. We're not best friends, perhaps we never will be, but we're sisters. Real sisters, without hierarchies, without accumulated resentments, without poisonous secrets. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and James sleeps beside me, I think about my mother. I imagine what our relationship would have been like if she'd had the courage to confess her mistake from the beginning. I imagine the conversations we could have had, the hugs we never gave, the tears we could have shared. But life doesn't give us the chance to rewrite the past, only to learn from it. The hearing aid I wear in my left ear sometimes picks up strange frequencies. Interference, the doctors say. But I like to think they're echoes from the past, remind us that our story is made as much of what we hear as what we don't hear. My partial hearing loss, which was the origin of this whole story, taught me to pay attention in other ways, to read expressions, to perceive the unspoken, to value silences as much as words. The last time I visited my mother's grave, I took Elizabeth and my children. The children ran amongst the headstones without the weight that adults carry in these places. I placed flowers on the cold marble and reread the inscription that Victoria and I had chosen together after everything. Elizabeth Whitmore, mother doctor, woman of contradictions and complex love. Victoria appeared beside me. She'd come straight from Manchester for this meeting we'd arranged. You know, Emma, sometimes I think Mummy planned all this, that she knew you'd eventually use that document, that she wanted us to arrive here, at this point, having learned what really matters. I looked at my sister, her face tanned by life in the north, her hands calloused from real work, her eyes finally free of the arrogance she'd always carried. Perhaps Victoria. Perhaps she was wiser than we ever imagined. The children called us. They wanted to go for ice cream. As we walked out of Highgate Cemetery, Oliver, one of my twins, took my hand and asked with that brutal honesty of children, "Mummy, Why was Grandma sad? I stopped for a moment, considering the answer. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes adults carry guilt so great it transforms love into distance? How do you explain that fear of facing our mistakes can destroy entire families? She wasn't always sad, my love. Sometimes people keep their feelings so deep they forget how to show them. But she loved Mummy and Aunt Victoria very much, in her special way. Oliver seemed satisfied with the answer and ran to catch up with his cousin. Victoria looked at me with gratitude. Thank you for not poisoning them against her, or against me. That afternoon, eating ice cream at a noisy Fortnum and Mason, watching her children share laughter and extra toppings, I thought about how the money that should have made me rich had given me something far more precious. It wasn't the millions themselves, but what they'd revealed and, paradoxically, what I'd lost by gaining them. I'd lost a mother I'd never really had, but I'd gained a sister who was hidden under layers of privilege and falseness. I'd lost innocence about my family, but I'd gained the wisdom that forgiveness is more precious than any inheritance. The will that should have been about division ended up being about union. The secret I kept for 3 years, that document in the worn plastic folder, wasn't a weapon of revenge as some might think. It was a key that opened doors that had been locked for decades, allowing truth to enter, and with it, the possibility of healing. James always says I'm too strong for my own good, that I should have used the document years earlier. But I believe everything has its time. If I'd revealed it whilst my mother was alive, it would have been about confrontation, about anger, about proving I was right. By waiting, even unconsciously, I allowed it to be about justice, about truth, and ultimately about forgiveness. The support center I created with the money from the house now serves more than 100 children. Some come just for hearing therapy, others participate in our educational programs. We have volunteer speech therapists, sign language teachers, specialized psychologists. Victoria, when she can, comes from Manchester and does free medical consultations. It's in these moments, seeing her tenderly examine a frightened child, that I see glimpses of the doctor she could always have been, if money and status hadn't clouded her vision for so long. A few weeks ago, a mother arrived at the center with a 4-year-old girl, recently diagnosed with partial hearing loss due to medical error. The mother was crying, blaming herself, asking how she could have let this happen. I sat with her in the garden, the same garden where Victoria and I played as children before everything went wrong. I told my story, showed my hearing aid, explained how that disability had, in a tortuous way, led to creating something good. Guilt will eat away at you if you let it, I told her. My mother let it, and it destroyed our family in the process. But you can choose differently. You can transform this mistake into love, into care, into redoubled attention. Your daughter doesn't need a perfect mother, she needs a present mother. The woman hugged me, crying, and in that moment I completely understood the weight my mother had carried for more than 20 years. The compensation money still yields dividends, but now they're invested entirely in the center. I've created a perpetual fund, ensuring the place continues to function even after I'm gone. It's my way of ensuring that the medical error I suffered, the guilt my mother carried, the money that divided our family, all of it transforms into something positive for other children, other families. Victoria rang me last night. Elizabeth had said her first complete words. Auntie Emma was what she said, trying to pronounce my name. I cried on the phone, and Victoria cried with me. 2 sisters, separated by years of injustice, now united by the next generation who won't carry the weight of our secrets. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mother hadn't left that document. If she'd taken the secret to the grave, letting the injustice perpetuate. I probably would have contested the will anyway, but without proof, it would have been just my word against Victoria's, a legal battle that would have destroyed what little remained of our relationship. The document wasn't just a confession, it was a belated act of love, a final attempt to repair what she'd broken. Mr. Thornton sought me out recently for coffee. He's about to retire and wanted to tell me something. Your mother consulted me several times over the years, he said, absent-mindedly stirring his cup. She always wanted to change the will, include you, But she never had the courage to confront your sister. So we created that document, a way to ensure justice without direct confrontation. She knew you were strong enough to use it when the time came. So she planned everything I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. He smiled. Your mother was many things, Emma, but stupid wasn't one of them. She knew her daughters better than you imagine. She knew Victoria would never share voluntarily, and that you'd never beg for crumbs. The document was her way of forcing a justice she didn't have the courage to do in life. I left that coffee with a strange sense of closure. My mother, in her twisted and complex way, had tried to fix things, not in the ideal way, not as a normal mother would, but in the only way she could, through papers, signatures, notaries, through the law, because emotions were too dangerous a territory for her to navigate. Today would have been my mother's 70th birthday. Victoria came from Manchester with her family. We took all the children to the center. We threw a party for the supported children, with cake, clowns who know sign language, music at appropriate volume for hearing aids. In the middle of the party, Victoria and I stepped away a bit, watching from afar the controlled joy of the children. You know what's most ironic? She said, taking a sip of orange squash from a paper cup. Mummy spent her whole life trying to mold us into what she thought we should be. You were supposed to be the successful doctor. I was supposed to be the perfect daughter. In the end, you became who you were always meant to be, and I only discovered who I really am when I lost everything. I looked at my sister, her serene face, her hands holding the cup with the same gentleness with which she now examines her humble patients. Perhaps that was her last lesson, Victoria. That money reveals character, doesn't build it. You always had kindness in you. It was just buried under layers of expectations and privileges. I always had strength. I just needed a reason to use it. The sun was beginning to set, painting London's sky in shades of orange and pink. The children continued playing, their hearing aids glinting in the golden light. Elizabeth was running after my twins, laughing with that pure joy only children possess. David and James were chatting about football near the improvised barbecue. In that moment, that exact moment, with my sister by my side, and our children playing in the garden that was once a symbol of division, and now was a space of union, I understood that my mother's will had fulfilled its purpose. Not the official will, the one that privileged Victoria and excluded me, but the real will, the hidden document, the kept confession. She left us more than money or property. She left us the opportunity to find each other, to forgive each other, to build something new on the ruins of the past. She left us the chance to be real sisters, not just by blood but by choice. Whilst we helped serve cake to the children, a girl with a cochlear implant tugged at the hem of my blouse. Auntie Emma, when I grow up, I want to be a nurse like you. I knelt to be at her level, gently adjusting her device that had shifted. You can be whatever you want, my dear. Doctor, nurse, teacher, astronaut. The important thing is to be happy and do good. The girl smiled and ran off, returning to the party. Victoria watched the scene, moved. You're good at this, with children. You always were, even when we were little. Remember when I fell off my bike and you took care of my scraped knee? Mummy was furious because you used her special gauze, but you didn't care. I remembered. I remembered many such moments, moments that had been buried under years of resentment and injustice. The party ended when the first stars began appearing in the London sky. Whilst we helped clean up, I found an envelope that had fallen behind a table. It was addressed to me, no sender. I opened it curiously and found an old photograph. It must have been about 20 years old. It was my mother, young, holding 2 babies in her arms. On the back, in handwriting different from hers, someone had written, Elizabeth with her twins, Emma and Victoria, 1987, the 2 halves of her heart. I showed the photograph to Victoria. She held it with trembling hands, tracing with her finger our mother's young face. Look how happy she seemed, she whispered, before everything. Before the medical error, before the guilt, before the wrong choices. I put the photograph in my bag, another piece of the puzzle that was our mother. That night, after everyone had gone and the center was quiet, I walked alone through the garden. The same garden where I'd played as a child, where my mother must have walked carrying the weight of her guilt. where now children with hearing impairments find support and hope. The circle had closed in a way no one could have predicted. My mobile vibrated. It was a message from Victoria. Got home safely. Elizabeth slept the whole way, clutching the drawing Oliver made for her. Thank you for today. Thank you for everything. For not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. Love you, sister. I replied simply. Love you too, Victoria. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't show it. And it was true. Love had always been there, buried under layers of hurt, suffocated by injustices, but never completely dead. Like seeds in the desert, waiting for the rare rain to germinate, our sisterly love had survived, and now finally it was blooming. I locked the center and drove home, where James and the children were waiting for me. On the radio, an old song was playing that my mother used to hum whilst cooking, in those rare moments when she seemed at peace. I sang along, my voice a bit off-key because of the compromised hearing, but I sang anyway. Arriving home, I found my family in the living room, James helping the twins with their homework. "Mummy!" they shouted, running to hug me. "Daddy says we can visit Aunt Victoria during the holidays. Can we, Mummy? Can we?" I hugged my children, feeling the sweet weight of their little bodies against mine. Of course we can, my loves. That's what family is for, to be together. Later, with the children asleep, I told James about the day, about the found photograph, about the feeling of coming full circle. He listened in silence, as he always does, his hand holding mine. "Your mother would be proud," he said finally. "Not for the division of money, not for the will, but for what you've built afterwards. For the family you've become despite everything." Lying in bed in the dark, with the sound of James's quiet breathing beside me, I thought about everything that had happened. 3 years ago, I'd entered that solicitor's office as an embittered woman carrying a folder with a secret that burned in my hands. Today, I was free. Free from anger, free from resentment, free from the weight of carrying alone a truth that belonged to all of us. My mother's will, in the end, wasn't about money. It was about truth, about justice, about the complexity of human love. It was about a woman who'd made a terrible mistake and tried to fix it in the only way she knew. It was about two sisters who had to lose everything to find each other. It was about forgiveness, not the easy kind we say with our lips, but deep forgiveness, the kind that transforms wounds into scars and scars into stories of overcoming. Tomorrow is a new day. I have the morning shift at hospital, a meeting at the center in the afternoon, family dinner in the evening. Victoria will ring, as she does every day now, to tell some mischief of Elizabeth's, or share a story about her patients. Life goes on, no longer divided between the favorite daughter and the forgotten one, but united in the understanding that all of us, my mother, Victoria, and I, did our best with the cards life dealt us. The secret I revealed in court didn't destroy my family, as some had predicted. On the contrary, it freed us. It freed Victoria from the golden prison of undeserved privilege. It freed me from the role of eternal victim. And, in a way I only understand now, it also freed my mother's spirit, wherever it may be. On the bedside table, next to the lamp, sits the photograph I found today. My young mother, holding her 2 daughters, the 2 halves of her heart. Tomorrow I'll frame it and put it in the center, so that everyone who passes by knows that even the most tortuous stories can have redemptive endings, that even the most unjust wills can hide acts of love, and that the truth, however painful, is always worth revealing.